There we go. And you'll be able to share your slides hopefully shortly, potentially, or not. Yeah, you can. There you go. Look at that. So, as I mentioned, Jamie is our technical lead. He spends a lot of time doing the technical design work, but also a lot of the road safety auditing and detailed design with different colleagues, sometimes myself, sometimes others, and doing lots of Austroads work, currently working on some updates to design guidance around high speed, treatments for medians, narrow medians, barriers, and the like, and a fair bit of work associated with particularly road safety barrier systems, but also quite a variety of other things. Before Safe System Solutions, Jamie worked with me at Vic Roads, and Jamie had a variety of roles, but he was the technical lead of traffic engineering and design for a good stint of that. And yeah, so it's there's a little bio of you, Jamie, and Jamie's contact details in there in the notes as well. If anybody wants to get in contact with Jamie after the session, clarify anything, or follow up with any of that technical discussion. So yeah, Jamie's going to present on this, and I'll briefly just go through this, Jamie, and then I'll hand it over to you because I'll contextualize it in what we've already covered. We have been talking a good bit in Module 1 about the difference between sort of a standards review and a road safety audit, but that clarification, and Jamie will repeat it, and it's one of the things we sort of hammer home quite a bit in a road safety audit course. And he's going to get into a bit about the design vehicles, check vehicles, square path diagrams, then sight distance stuff, and then sort of big lists of common issues that you might find in road safety audits when you're into that detailed design stage where you're getting all of that documentation. And then Tony Bull, I think, will be joining us, and Tony sort of has expertise heavily in the worksite traffic management side of things. So he'll jump in and tell us a bit about that. It's a fairly short presentation on that and fairly general, but it is important that we cover that off as well. Remember, we're trying to ensure that we cover off all of those things that a road safety audit course has to have. So you could register yourself in Queensland or Victoria or New South Wales, of course. And yeah, we'll talk about some of the challenges with construction site audits. I'll finish the whole thing off by going into or giving you more information about primary and supporting treatments and the recommendations. And the reason I do that is because it's a more and more important thing in other jurisdictions to be categorizing your recommendations. And I do want to make sure you've sort of got your head around that. Even though you might use it immediately in practice in New South Wales, it's something important for us to confidently give you that certificate. So that's the plan for today. Of course, we'll have a break half time, and we might even finish 5 minutes early if things are going well. I'll be in the background for most of this session, monitoring the chat. So if you've got questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. Of course, being this format, you can also put your hand up or just unmute yourself and ask your question to Jamie or myself. It looks like everybody's pretty happy with that, Jamie. I think they're picking along nicely. It means I can hand it over to you and you can tell us a bit about road safety auditing at those design stages.
Thanks, Ken, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll be talking particularly about detailed design stage road safety audits and the importance of heavy vehicles. Why heavy vehicles, I hear you ask? They are critical to the geometric design of our roads, in particular our intersections. They influence many of those geometric elements, site distance requirements, and so on. I want to put an emphasis on that. The other reason is the fact that heavy vehicles are hugely overrepresented in the crash problem on our roads. So it's critical that we consider the requirements and the safety issues associated with them. But to recap, I'd like to just have a quick chat about the difference between a standards or a design review and a road safety audit. It sounds like you've touched on this a little already. A standards review is exactly that. It's a check of a design to ensure that it's compliant with standards. That doesn't necessarily mean that it will be a safe design. Designing to standards certainly does improve safety and generally provide safe outcomes, but there are instances when it does not. For instance, our standards and guidelines provide for signalised intersections in high-speed environments, which is an inherently unsafe treatment. Another example might be a project that brings together lots of minimum standards, design exceptions. It's when we do that, we combine various minimums that we often increase the likelihood of safety issues. A road safety audit, on the other hand, the focus really is on providing safe road outcomes, safe outcomes for all road users. So you are assessing in accordance with standards, but that's not the be all and end all. It might be that you determine that something that has been designed in accordance with standards is not safe, or that there are safety issues associated with it. You might also find that something that's not designed in accordance with a relevant standard or guidelines doesn't have a safety consequence associated with it. So you're really putting yourself in the situation of the various road users that might be expected to use a piece of road, and thinking about whether it would be safe for all of those different road users and activities. When you're undertaking a road safety audit, and particularly one at the detailed design end of the process, you're going to have lots of information to consider. You'll have a set of design drawings, and it could be a pretty hefty set of drawings, particularly if it's a larger project. We could be dealing with hundreds of plans, from layout plans, geometric plans, your long sections, cross sections, details around signs and lines and signals and all of those things. On top of that, you might have a design report, and that may capture many of the things listed on this slide, which are important to understand to understand the context of the project, the design intent, and the drivers behind the project and the choices that have been made in developing the design. So it's important to understand the design vehicles that have fed into the design. And I'm sure some of you have heard that term design vehicle. It's the largest vehicle, typically a truck, perhaps a bus, that is expected to use the piece of road on a regular basis. And the size and performance of that vehicle will dictate many of the geometric elements of the road design. Typical choices might be a service vehicle, which is representative of a garbage truck or a removal truck. That might be relevant on a more local road environment. At a more major intersection, we're dealing with bigger vehicles typically, so you might be looking at something like a semi-trailer or a B-double or an even larger truck again. The speed environment, or particularly the design speed, the speed that you're designing to, is important in determining many of those geometric elements. So it's important to understand what speed a road is being designed to. Vehicle swept paths may be provided to you in the form of swept path diagrams. If they are not, and particularly if you have any questions or concerns around whether there's enough space to accommodate the chosen design vehicles, I encourage you to ask for swept path diagrams. And if they can't readily be provided, that's a concern. Swept paths should be checked as an integral part of the design process. So a designer should be able to readily provide those. Traffic volume, vehicle classes using a road, pedestrian and cyclist activity are all important considerations. The crash history of the site. There's a bit of difference of opinion in the auditor community around this. Some like to understand the crash history, some don't. Those that don't prefer not to sort of go into a project with the blinkers on, so to speak, and be concerned with crashes or things that have happened in the past, which oftentimes are really quite random in nature. So that's one thing to think about. You may want to know the crash history of the site, and certainly if there is a trend of crashes, that can be important information to have. If there are previous audit reports, I think it's a good practice for auditors to review those to ensure that concerns raised previously have been addressed. Stepping back to see whether you agree with concerns that might have been raised previously, whether they've been addressed, whether they deserve repeating as part of your audit. Different auditors have different styles, pick up different things, so it can be quite sort of an educational thing to review those reports as well. On top of all of these things, I encourage you as auditors to request anything else that might come to mind that you think might help you understand the context of the project and how the design has been developed. I'll now step through a few common issues that pop up regularly when undertaking audits. The first of those is around design vehicles and swept paths. It could be that the choice of design vehicle is not correct or is not the best choice. The design vehicle, as I mentioned, is the largest vehicle that will use a piece of road on a regular basis, and we want the road to be able to accommodate the movements of that vehicle in a desirable way. That includes making turns from the appropriate lane, not crossing curbs, not encroaching any areas basically that it shouldn't. Another term that you may have heard is checking vehicle. Any project is designed based on the requirements of a design vehicle and also a check vehicle. The check vehicle is typically a larger vehicle again that might come along once in a while. We need to ensure that the design can accommodate that check vehicle, but not necessarily in the same way that it does the design vehicle. So it might be that vehicle needs to move into an opposing traffic lane, swing out wide in order to make a turn. It might need to mount an island or something like that. But because the movement of that vehicle is so infrequent, and it might even be under traffic management or an escort or something like that, we accept that it can do those things. The alternative would be to make our intersections larger again, which can have some safety disbenefits.
Okay.
The choice. Sorry, Ken.
That's all right. A couple of questions to come in, and one was associated with what you've just talked about there with check vehicle, design vehicle. One was, so is the design speed at 10 kilometres per hour above the posted speed limit, so that you would say if it's a 70k zone that you'd add 10 and then your geometric design would be for 80? Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, that's right. It's typical to do that in a rural environment. Certainly, we assume, well, we find typically that operating speeds exceed, or the 85th percentile speeds exceed the posted limit by up to 10 kilometres per hour. So we take a conservative approach and design for speeds 10 kilometres higher than the posted speed limit.
Is that across Australia? that we use, like our design people use that methodology, but I suppose you could use the 85th percentile speed too. Is that correct?
That's right. If you've got information, some speed data that suggests that the 85th percentile speed is, not 10 kilometers per hour above the limit, then you could use that data.
So I was going to ask about urban environments, Jamie, to get that one. Yep.
In urban environments, it's typical that the design speed is equal to the posted speed limit. We don't see that differential in operating speeds and the speed limit. On the choice of design vehicle, we really need to look to the future there. There are larger vehicles increasingly using our networks. We need to be mindful of changes in land use in the vicinity of a project that might influence the types of vehicles accessing the site. It's often the case that different design vehicles are used for different movements. If we're considering an intersection, there might be particularly large trucks making certain turns or movements and smaller vehicles making others. So it's not always the same vehicle for all movements. When you're out on site, keep an eye out for the types of vehicles that are getting about and the land use in the area. So what does it matter if we do get things wrong? Potential issues include those larger vehicles encroaching areas that they shouldn't. If there's not enough space for them, they might encroach into an adjacent lane because they need that extra space to make a turn. They might encroach a pedestrian area, particularly mount a curb at an intersection corner. You might see conflicts between opposing traffic within intersections, say concurrent right turners. And a telltale sign of there not being enough space is impacts with roadside furniture, vehicles crossing curbs, striking signs, and so on. So these are all issues associated with there not being enough space. So perhaps the choice of design vehicle is a vehicle that is too small. We can go too far the other way and adopt a design vehicle that's too large. And the result of that is that our intersections increase in size, which can mean that we've got some excessive areas of pavement that might be difficult to delineate. They might allow smaller vehicles to make turns at excessive speeds, these type of things. So we've got to strike a balance between providing enough space for the right vehicles and not making things too big. There's lots of guidance available from Austroads around design vehicles, swept paths, clearances between vehicles and roadside elements and between other vehicle streams. You can see a couple of examples there. The image on the left, I think, is from Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 4A. The other important reference, which is the source of the snip on the right, is the Austroads Guide to Design Vehicles and Swept Paths, which spells out the different design vehicle options, the radii that we ought to adopt when we're generating our swept paths, turn speeds, and so on. So that's an important reference that I encourage you to look to. When we're generating swept paths, which these days is done using auto-turn software, it is important that we are generating them in accordance with this guidance. So particularly adopting radii that are not less than the prescribed minimums, that we're constructing turns on single radii rather than varying radii within curves, which is not the way that we would expect an unfamiliar driver to negotiate an intersection. Clearance requirements need to be met, and you can see here some clearances nominated, a 1 metre clearance between these two vehicles travelling in the same direction, a 2 metre clearance between the vehicles travelling in opposing directions. It's often the case when we generate swept paths that we also draw an offset line, offset 0.5 metre from the vehicle body, which allows us to check some of these things. Here's an example of a swept path diagram, and you can see some of those offset lines. We've got some parallel lines on either side of each swept path, which I assume is a 0.5 metre clearance from the vehicle body. Lots of other lines happening there, and it's important to sort of know what's what. We've got some dashed lines there which represent wheel paths. So that can be important in situations like bus stops, where we might allow some overhang of a curb, but we need to ensure that the wheels remain on the pavement. It's usually the case, though, that we're considering the outermost part of the body, the full envelope, the full swept path. And we then like to provide a 0.5 metre clearance between that and any roadside object like a curb or a sign. This is not... Sorry, Ken.
Sorry, Jamie. There's just Blair's got a hand up. I think might want to delve into a question.
Yeah, sure. Just while you're on that, I just look at that and you see, I guess, the kink in the purple path. Is that acceptable? Obviously, the designer's done that to make it work, but realistically, like, you could have 2 trucks that actually, if they do a full path, they will hit. So, if you see that, do you pull that up?
You ought to. Yeah, good pickup. So this is not by the book, certainly. The purple one in particular is not good. So this looks like a bit of sort of back to front design where, it's obviously a constrained environment. You can see the property boundaries at the corners. There's not much room to play with. It appears that an intersection has sort of been drawn up within the available space, and then some swept paths have been put on, and either an attempt has been made to show that it works, or someone's showing this is what a truck would need to do to navigate the intersection. That's sort of back to front. You should be drawing the swept paths in a desirable way first, and then designing the intersection around those. The purple one obviously is not drawn on a single radius. You can see it kinking around. Around here, we've got a sort of very short, tight turn happening, then it straightens up, then it turns again. So that's not the way that a truck driver would typically like to drive through an intersection, or certainly wouldn't unless they knew that they had to do that turn in that way. The thing to look out for here is these little arrowheads, if you can make them out. There are a series of those along that swept path. Each of those basically represents a mouse click, a change in direction that has been done to generate this path. If that had been drawn in the desirable way on that, say 15 metre single radius curve, there'd be quite some overlap of those paths in the centre of the intersection here. The blue one is a lot better, but I've still got some questions about it. So as an auditor, you then need to think about, well, what are the issues associated with this? I suppose there's potential for 2 trucks to end up in a sort of a head-on situation, although you would think that those drivers would anticipate that and take some evasive action or put on the brakes. You could mitigate the risk through signal phasing so that those movements weren't allowed to occur concurrently. So you can see in the centre of the intersection, there's that issue there of lack of clearance if these were drawn properly. At the top left corner, we've got very little space available between the curb and the property boundary, which could present a pedestrian safety issue if pedestrians needed to move through that part of the intersection. At the bottom left, we've got more of a standards type finding where we've got a conduit that's shown to pass through private property, which is obviously not something we'd want to do, but doesn't have any safety implications, and therefore would not likely be shown in an audit report, a road safety audit report. Here's another example of a swept path diagram, and this one's a little more transparent and by the book. You can see some radii that have been nominated here, 12.5 metre radius in this case, drawn to the outer wheel path, which is typically the radii that we use. It's sometimes referred to as curb to curb radius. So if you imagine a vehicle making a U-turn within a curbed road, it would be the radius that it would take, whereby the wheels would remain on the pavement. There may be some overhang of the curb, but we use that term curb to curb radius. This was actually a design that we were provided along with some swept paths that had some funny things about them, and we decided to do our own checks. And when we did, we found that the intersection really didn't cater adequately for the required movements. And you can see here at this corner of the intersection, with the blue swept path, there's quite a bit of encroachment into that pedestrian area, and we're even striking this staircase here. Alternatively, a vehicle would need to make that turn from the right-hand lane, or at least straddle part of that lane, or swing out wider into the intersection. We like to prepare our designs in a consistent way where, particularly catering to unfamiliar drivers, such that they can make their turns on a constant radius, a predictable, generous radius, and not have to do unusual things in order to make their way through an intersection. Checking some other movements at the same intersection, we see quite a bit of overlap between some turns that would be allowed to occur concurrently. So there's obviously some that raises some safety concerns as well. Out on site, we can observe what vehicles are doing, whether they are able to negotiate intersections within the available space. We might see vehicles mounting curb, which might point to an issue of there not being enough space. It might point to other issues as well, such as a lack of delineation or poor delineation, perhaps excessive speeds. You can see here vehicles tracking regularly behind the curb and over a pit. So we might see, broken curb, broken pits, knockdown signs, and these type of things. At this location, we've got vehicles encroaching onto this raised island and through a pedestrian area. You can see the tyre tracks through here. The direction of travel is towards us. I'm sure that the lack of contrast between the concrete roadway and the concrete island is part of the problem here. I believe that excessive speeds are also an issue. This is near the Port of Melbourne, lots of trucks belting through there. There's a pedestrian safety issue here with trucks encroaching those pedestrian areas here, but particularly here on the right-hand side as we're looking at it. A pedestrian here on the left would be in plain view of an approaching truck driver, and you would hope that they would choose not to take that path if one was there. It's on the other side of the road, on the inside of the curve, that we often see pedestrian safety issues, and that's because the rear wheels of longer vehicles, particularly articulated vehicles, track on a shorter radius than the front wheels. There's a cut-in effect, and unfortunately, we do from time to time see and hear of pedestrians being struck while waiting at intersection corners. That's a common thing to see on our roadsides, signs like this knocked flat, perhaps as a result of a lack of space for turning vehicles. Another prime example of this is the keep left sign on a splitter island, where it's common to provide sort of rebounding type posts, but where we frequently see larger vehicles encroaching onto those islands, which could point to excessive speeds, perhaps a lack of space. Other common issues relate to sight lines. Now, there's a whole suite of different sight distance requirements described in the Austroads Guides, parts 3 and 4. We have sight distance requirements to vehicles, to other road users, particularly pedestrians, to the pavement. So you might have heard the terms approach sight distance, that's between driver eye height and the pavement. Stopping sight distance is from a driver eye to an object on the pavement of an assumed height of 200 millimetres. All sorts of different sight distance requirements that it's important for auditors to have an awareness of, not necessarily know the ins and outs and the numbers around them. But as an auditor, you can usually put yourself out in those critical locations within a project and think about sight distance and whether or not you as a road user would feel comfortable making a turn or crossing a road in a particular location. We often do find sight distance obstructions out on site. That might be due to the road alignment. There might be a horizontal curve with trees or other objects on the inside of the curve that impede sight distance around the curve. You might have a crest in the road that limits sight distance. Other times, particularly at intersections, we have parked vehicles or utility poles and so on near the intersection that impede sight lines, particularly for motorists turning out of the side road. Sight lines can be reduced also due to the stand-up angle or the approach angle to an intersection. Where motorists need to approach an intersecting road at an acute angle, that creates difficulty for motorists to view approaching traffic, particularly the elderly and mobility impaired. Those acute angles can require you to look back hard over your shoulder. And it's in those situations, those Y-type intersections, that we often see some poor safety outcomes. SISD is a common sight distance requirement. Do we have a poll question on this, Ken, or can I put a question out to the audience on what SISD stands for?
Question, do we have got a poll? Look at that. But with polls, nobody gets a prize because we don't know who answers first and answers correctly first, but we'll let that run for a little bit, get people interacting. I remind everybody, we will have a break, probably in about 20 minutes maybe, or maybe even a little less. And we've got a few. Justin says he's answered first. Oh, I can't prove it. All right, I'll give it another 5 seconds on this one. Most people have got their answers in. The debate rages as to who was first. 3, 2, 1. And that And they're going to share the results, and almost everybody in there with the safe intersection sight distance, Jamie.
Well done. So safe intersection sight distance is a requirement that we should be providing at intersections. Some important things that this diagram sort of demonstrate is that we need to look at things in the vertical and the horizontal planes. Crests can impede sight lines. So safe intersection sight distance provides enough time and distance for a driver on the major road to see a vehicle enter a collision situation here, perhaps stall in the worst case, see that unfold, put on the brakes and come to a stop before they reach that point. You can imagine that if we had some trees, poles, other objects near this intersection corner, that sight lines between those vehicles would be worsened, and the likelihood of cross traffic crashes would be increased. That's often I guess a point of debate. Do we consider sort of objects that temporarily place themselves in these sort of areas as sight distance obstructions, such as parked cars? The guidelines are probably a little open to interpretation there, but I'd suggest that you should consider those things. There are plenty of examples of locations where parked vehicles located near to intersection corners are a significant sight distance obstruction and where we have significant crash problems.
So Jamie, there is
another point that I'll make here is to always consult your jurisdictional supplement when you're looking to Austroads guidance like this. It's sometimes the case that the states and territories have some departures from the Austroads guidance or clarifications on those. And this is an example where some jurisdictions do have some. So always consult your supplement, which does take precedence over the Austroads guide.
Jamie, the question's coming in there from Blair, and you had his hand up before, but I think this probably is what it was. But you are in a slide coming up going to talk about different sight distances, are you?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, good. We will cover that. I was just checking.
Oh.
Yeah, sight distances for us come up a lot when we review traffic committee items. So, yeah, touching base on that would be great for everyone, I think.
Yeah, sure. Now I've got a couple of slides coming up, but if you've got any specific questions, please put them in. Here's a little real-world example of a sight distance issue that arose. This relatively wide urban road was wide enough when there were no parked cars present to operate as a 4-lane road, and that's what would happen during busy periods. So the decision was made to deter that behaviour and to formalise parking lanes along this length, and you can see the yellow lines indicating that. Those parking lanes would continue up to about 10 metres from the intersecting roads as per standards. But when that project was implemented, an issue around sight lines and intersection crashes quickly presented. You can see there that these cars parked near the intersection really do limit sight distance to approaching vehicles. Coast sort of might appear clear there, but a fraction of a second later, this car is upon you. So this is a very typical black spot crash issue, intersection sort of crash hotspot, and sight distance or a lack of sight distance really is to blame. So we've introduced a hazard, we've solved one, we've introduced another. I'll put the question to you, what might we be able to do now to try and address the issue that's been introduced?
remove some of those cars. I'm just trying to think, in an urban environment, you wouldn't be using safe intersection sight distance. I think you'd wipe out a lot of parking. So I always fall back on stopping sight distance or approach sight distance.
Yeah, SISD really,
It's more rural, I think.
it is, and I think it's sort of worded in the guide as not as a mandatory requirement. It's sort of more of a nice to have. And you're right, in urban environments we regularly don't have it. Yeah, and we often sort of fall back on using stop signs where our sight distance is minimal. But you're right, we could take away some parking. Sometimes that's easier said than done, but if we didn't have vehicles parked here, that would open up our sight lines. Just putting in some signs banning parking might not be enough. Any other responses coming in, Ken?
Yeah, so we did have the use of a stop control there, and pushing the line forward, the hold line forward, possibly. Obviously, I think
I like that. If we can bring the hold line forward to somewhere around here.
and Justin wants to do some curb build outs or curb out stands.
That'd be a great outcome. If we could construct a curb out stand through this area, and also bring our hold line forward to somewhere around here, that would really open up sight lines. That would probably result in the first car space or two being removed, which would help further.
Andy just wants to chime in on that a little bit. Over to you, Andy. You have to unmute yourself there.
Sorry. This comes up quite a lot where we push the hold line in line with the edge line. But having discussions with our design people, we don't want the bonnet of the car intruding the travel lane. So sometimes we set back the hold line about a metre or 500 back from the edge line. So the front of the car is not intruding the travel lane.
Yeah, that's a fairly common practice and a good practice, and particularly in higher speed environments. I think the Austroads guidance might be to set your hold line back about 5 metres from the dividing line, or the sort of first lane line to cater to that sort of overhang. Another issue that we need to be mindful of if we are constructing out stands and bringing hold lines forward is that we're not squeezing up cyclists. If there was a cycle lane through here, we'd need to maintain that width through the intersection for cyclists and make sure that we weren't creating a pinch point where we're pushing cyclists into the path of traffic. The question was asked about some different sight distance requirements, and this is just some of them. There are many, and the differences between some of them are subtle. Stopping sight distance and approach sight distance are probably the two most basic and mandatory requirements. They are numerically equal. The difference between the two is the height that the driver is looking to. So they're both measured from a driver eye height. Stopping sight distance is measured to an object on the road with an assumed height of 200 millimetres. So that could be, a rock or some other object, or perhaps even a human body on the road. And we look to provide stopping sight distance continually along all roads. Approach sight distance, as I say, numerically equal to stopping sight distance, but it's measured to the road pavement. So it's particularly important at intersections and like other locations such as mergers, where it's important that a driver can see pavement markings well in advance. So it's measured to the pavement level, so we can see hold lines, turn arrows, diverge locations, these types of things. Entering site distance is not a mandatory requirement. It's more of a nice to have. The intention of entering site distance is that motorists entering a major road from a side road or a driveway can get up to speed. There's enough site distance available to allow a motorist to choose a gap that allows them to get up to speed without impeding traffic on the major road. So that oftentimes can't be achieved, but that's something to provide where we can. There are various others, and one that's not listed there is crossing site distance, which relates to pedestrian crossing locations. These are all covered in some detail in the Austroads Guides, Part 3 and Part 4A particularly. If there are any particular questions about site distance requirements, I'm happy to take those now.
Jamie,
I
just to
had
clarify.
one- Sorry, you go, Andy.
So, mate, you can go if you want.
No, you're right.
This comes up quite a lot with new zebra crossings or new children's crossing. We use is the standard crossing site distance as your main measure for locating these facilities, whether it's a wombat, a zebra, or a refuge.
Ken's been doing a bit of work in this space of late, and it's probably an area that the guidance is not entirely there, is it?
No, the guidance is horrible across everything on this. I will, maybe while Blair asks his question, you get the answer. I'm going to bring up a few slides that I'll jump into to answer that, because I think it's a really good it's a good question, and I want to answer it. So
here's a pair of slides for you.
Good one, Andy. Keep trying, mate.
I thought I was on mute.
You're never on mute. The entering site distance and minimum gap site distance. What's the difference between those two?
Entering site distance is about vehicles turning onto a road and travelling in the same direction as approaching traffic. So, perhaps making a left turn, looking to the right, and seeing a vehicle approach. You want to make a left turn. It's to provide you enough distance to make that left turn and get up to speed before that vehicle arrives. Minimum gap site distance is more about crossing manoeuvres. So either a right turn onto a two-way road or a crossing movement across a road. It's a minimum gap site distance provides you enough site distance to make that, to judge those gaps and make those type of movements.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks.
okay, so you've got a few more slides to go, don't you, Jamie? Not huge.
Got a few, yeah. How are we going for time?
We've probably got about another 10 minutes on this. I'm realizing though, I've got a lot of content around site distance at crossing points, so it may be a little bit of a challenge.
Did you want to show that now, Ken, or at the end?
I'll run through it really quickly, and I appreciate here that it's probably not going to satisfy all of your questions, but I'm happy to chat with people as they come up. So I'm just going to steal your screen there, Jamie. Really, hopefully you're seeing that, are you? Yeah. So we have a 1.6 metre setback and a 1.2 metre sort of crossing speed. The 1.6 metre setback, you've got to, that's the stock standard, but you've got to adjust that. If you're coming off a running path or something, that goes straight out across the road, you're going to want to probably adjust that. Sorry, I'm just moving forward. People often just revert to the road rule requirement of a 20-metre setback in Australia, where there's no parking, and they use that as a sort of sight distance thing on the approach, which in some situations I would say is excessive, and in some situations is not enough. So I caution people on just reverting to that. But you to do your sight distance, you use the sort of standard stopping sight distance calculation there, 1.6 metre setback, and you get your sight triangle, use your 85th percentile speed, and your coefficients of friction, and you usually use lower reaction times because it's all urban situation, and you calculate it out. So that's set up for a pedestrian crossing though. If it's raised, everything would just say use the same requirements, but we know that a driver is going to slow regardless of if there's a pedestrian there or not. So it doesn't quite make sense. And so in one sense, you could use this very short stopping sight distance at the 85th percentile of the ramp grade, or instead use that as your speed. But that's kind of not probably appropriate either, really. See, I've done this sort of graph of how it kind of would play out, that if vehicles coming along, at some point, they're going to, see the crossing as a speed hump at least, and start to slow down. And then they're going to hit this decision point of, okay, here I can either see a pedestrian and I've got enough time to stop. So that's where you really start to get to. So really you want to be somewhere between that. The reason I got a lot of councils out there that are and others that are using the full one for a raised crossing, and then they can't meet that because of a parked car or car parking or the like, and they abandon the crossing. They say, well, we can't do that because we can't meet the sight line requirements, and that's where I go to a lower one. Of course, you can do curb out stands to help yourself out there, and then that's some other stuff. It's probably not quite relevant, so I'm jumping through a few things. It's probably about it. I think, yeah. So there's a super quick run through on that. But please, if you're dealing with specifics around that, I'm always happy to have a quick look at it and give you a quick opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. That was good.
And
It's still a hard one to answer though. I still use the crossing sight distance, but if there's play or where you can maneuver, because parking's a premium, I suppose you can come down and do an assessment on what the speeds will be if a wombat was installed.
Yeah. So sorry, crossing sight distance is only used for non-pedestrian priority locations, because that's the sight distance needed for a pedestrian to look, see a gap, and then dart across through that gap, and that takes into account pedestrian movement speed, which was a 1.2. So when you've got an actual pedestrian crossing, you don't use crossing sight distance. You use stopping sight distance for the vehicle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I did find that it actually says in road design part 4, provision of stopping signs should be used for crossing where pedestrians has priority. Where you've got a refuge, it talks about where the pedestrian doesn't have priority, you use CSD.
Yes.
Does that sound correct?
That's correct. So at a refuge island, like, a crossing point that's a refuge island where cars still have priority, you've got to get crossing sight distance. So the pedestrian's got time to pick that gap and jump into the median. Yeah. But we could chat a bit more about this at a later stage there. It's there's a lot to unpack. And I think somebody also put in their lighting around pedestrian crossings. That's a whole other beast. Jamie could talk to you about that as well. But I thought, oh, yeah, we've got a whole raised crossing course, which I think some of you might have even done with us. Okay.
I've just got a few slides to go. I'll just touch briefly on rural and remote unsealed roads, which present some unique challenges. Roads like the one pictured here, which are often, long, sort of monotonous roads, that carry fairly low volumes. But in terms of, relative to the amount of traffic they carry, they do present elevated safety risks. And the issues typically present at locations where there's some change in the road environment, particularly where at curves. So it's important to provide some warning, some advanced warning of curves, especially if they require speed reduction. Where there's variability in the road surface, perhaps some corrugation or even a dip, it's important to provide some warning of situations like that. So, the treatments that typically apply to those, I suppose, Band-Aid type treatments of signage and delineation. Here is a list of common issues that auditors might pick up at intersections, and we've touched on a few of these. These and others are alluded to in the checklists in the Guide to Road Safety, Part 6A, and I encourage you to look to those, especially if you're new to auditing. There's a different checklist for audits for each stage of audit, from existing conditions through to detailed design. So this list applies to intersections, and at intersections we're really thinking about potential for vehicle conflicts, catering for crossing movements, for vulnerable road users, all of those things that we see around intersections with roadside objects and hardware and so on. At mid-block locations is a bit of a different focus. Here we're thinking about the geometric alignment of the road, the cross-section of the road. Is the roadside environment safe? Is there adequate space and separation for vulnerable road users, pavement condition, and all of these type of things? So if there are any questions on any of those things, if there are any things in those lists that sort of pique your interest or don't make any sense, happy to have any questions now on any of those.
So there's a question around what a Danish offset is, and Justin is doing my job for me. I think a prize might go out, another prize might go out there. Danish offset is a pedestrian crossing where you walk into the median and then along the median a bit, and then or along a splitter island a bit, and then cross again, and it's linked to a safe system snippet on it, which was number 1 now, and we're up to 197 snippets out there at the moment, and we keep finding little bits of interest for people and putting them out there. A staggering crossing, or a Z crossing, it's sometimes called. All right.
The important thing there is that the stagger direction results in pedestrians within the median sort of walking towards oncoming traffic. So you sort of want a left-right stagger rather than a right-left stagger, if that makes sense.
Yes, that is correct. Well done. And that was the focus of snippet number 1. So Justin's put that link in. Feel free to jump in and have a look. It's got a couple of diagrams of exactly what we're talking about. But I think that's a great point for us to have a little break. Thank you for your presentation there, Jamie. That was excellent. Tony has arrived. So let's take 4 minutes, have a stretch, fill the water up, and then we will get back into it. Okay, we're going to get back into it. And yeah, so we want to cover off construction site, road safety audit of construction sites. And no better person to take us through this than Tony Bull. And some of you might have crossed paths with Tony in his many ventures with worksite traffic management and the like across Austroads and Australian Standards Committees and a variety of other places, and his long career in the Victorian government. He's now just recently joined us at Safe System Solutions, and he, amongst other things, he'll be one of our lead trainers for the ASHTAS system, which some of you might have heard of, which is the Austroad Safety Hardware Accreditation Scheme. So any of you that do anything with road safety barriers, you're going to start to need to be a licensed person to do that, to do a whole variety of things. And we've got we are a training provider of that and giving out the licenses, and Tony will be offering that when we launch it very shortly. But yeah, Tony's very passionate about the safety of workers and the safety of the public around work sites, construction sites, and has been passionate for a very long time and continues that passion. So I always had asked him when he was at Vic Roads or DOT to present this and continued that on. And Tony sort of rubs his hands together every time and he says, "Great, how many days are you going to give me, Ken?" And I was like, "Oh, I feel bad. You're going to have about 40 minutes. And so what he's done is he's pre-recorded a longer version, which goes into more detail, which you can watch at any point, but he'll give you the condensed version here. And of course, his contact details are all there on the screen, and you can get in contact via myself or anybody at Safe System Solutions as well. So over to you, Tony, and they'll be asking questions through the chat or even just jumping in and talking to you because it's a meeting version.
Yeah, no, happy to take questions at any stage, Ken, that's for sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks for that, Ken. As Ken said, I've just started with Safe System Solutions. I took an early retirement from the Department of Transport, old Vic Roads, back in December, and very happy to be on board with Safe System Solutions to provide this training and other training along the way, and to continue on a role in this safety at work sites, or road work sites, I should say. Yeah, it's such a high risk activity that we need to continue to push for the safety of our workers, those who are entering the site, those who even visiting the sites, that we are managing the safety of everyone. Yeah, as Ken said, I spent a lot of time with the Department of Transport and Vic Roads, almost 39 years. I didn't quite get there. I've been exposed to international projects, Dubai, Philippines and Indonesia, again with the safety at roadwork sites. I've been on the Australian Standards Committee for 1742 Part 3 and also on the Austroads Committee for the new guidance material, the AGTM, Austroads Guides to Temporary Traffic Management at Roadworks. So it's been a wide variety of this exposure to traffic management at roadwork sites. It's been an involving piece of work that we try and keep up with the latest and greatest techniques and signage and devices that are available to us to ensure we have these safe work sites. But the important part about today is the role a road safety auditor takes throughout this, the package of keeping everybody's safe at roadworks. Excuse me. I've been involved with training of traffic controllers, traffic management implementation, certainly road construction, road maintenance was a large part of my role, and asset management with Vic Roads Department of Transport. But like I was saying, that road safety auditing, the task that requires is, yes, and I'll touch on these in a little bit more detail as we go through the next half hour. But the role of the auditor is to have that independence, to have that fresh set of eyes that looking at a particular roadwork site. As I said, you've got to have that independence, and it's not a surveillance or a compliance check. It's certainly to understand the documentation that needs to be involved in ensuring that everything is set up correctly. But it's the checking of the safety operation of the whole work site. And even outside the roadworks ahead or in roadwork signing, what are the influencing factors that has a safety potential or cause a safety issue within that work site. So I often say is look outside the square that we work in, that just look a little bit beyond the signs, just to make sure that all those safety concerns are being addressed through the process of managing the work site. This is at my old office in Warrnambool, and this is the car park, and for the parking bays, it was just a few stuck down dots, pavement markers that depict the parking. And if you looked at that, and all my life I've always took it as 90-degree parking, but you sort of think, well, actually, could it be 45 or is it 90? And this is just an example of how people perceive a traffic management device if it isn't clearly marked. And as I said, one driver thought it was a 45, the other one thought it was a 90. And this is just a very simplistic example of making sure that we are actually giving them the correct message to the travelling public to ensure that they get through the work site in a safe way that is not going to compromise the safety of the workers at that site. This, I'll probably keep saying this as well, that it's that having that independent set of eyes as a road safety auditor to be able to look at the whole picture, to not just have the blinkers on to say, well, we need to get this construction work done. We're on tight time frames. We're on budgets that need to be met, or construction prices that need to be met. That's not the issue of a road safety auditor. The road safety auditor is to ensure that the site safety component is operating without compromising the travelling public or the workers. And the road safety audit, yes, we've got to understand, what's in the standards. The Australian Standard 1742 Part 3, it had a lot of guidance material in it, and so that's why the the Austroads Guides to Temporary Traffic Management was introduced, and so that guidance material, as I said, it's an evolving industry that is coming up with better ways and standards, not standards, the way we do things change. So that to get those documents updated was an easier process than trying to get them updated in an Australian standard, which they generally get updated every 5 to 10 years. But the guides, they continually get reviewed and updated accordingly based on best current practice. And there's 10 parts, and these parts are available on the Austroads website. I think Ken will provide a link in Moodle for these. So yeah, it's very comprehensive in the way that to manage traffic at a temporary roadwork site. You know, and there's a lot of detail in there, and we don't expect as auditors to know them from cover to cover, but to have an understanding of what the expectations on all those different components of looking after a work site from a compliance point of view, but again, remembering the role of a road safety auditor is to make sure that the site is operating safely. This was an example on a rural highway in Victoria. I come across this site. It was a power company that was doing some power line repairs, and it's just frustrating that, you know, you could have signing like this where what they're trying to achieve is to protect the workers. That's why they're slowing the traffic down to 40 kilometres an hour. There's a traffic controller up there. They're asking, you know, be prepared to stop. But potentially the traffic could travel at 100 kilometres an hour, and that's compromising everybody's safety. And even when I spoke to the supervisor on site from the power company, going, no, not my problem. Well, I said, well, yes, it is. This is your site. You've got the responsibility for the safety at the site. It's not the traffic management company. Yeah, the traffic management company has been employed to or engaged to provide the traffic management, but you are responsible for the safety at the site. So therefore, you need to be responsible for the way the signing is managed. And it's really important, again, as an auditor, to just ask the question, you know, when you're arranging these road safety audits, that you speak to the supervisor, you would speak to the people who are managing the site to, you know, understand what their requirements are, but also as an independent set of eyes goes through the site, that you're looking for, you know, what concerns that may be impacting on the worker safety and travelling public safety. And, you know, the disappointing part about this site was that the traffic management company didn't have enough signs. Their site, or the preparation, their daily preparation didn't allow enough signs, or they thought they had enough and found out that they didn't. So it's really disappointing that, you know, this occurred with the potentially of, I don't know, there's probably 3,000 vehicles a day travel on this rural highway. And so that's an exposure to the workers and the travelling public that's, you know, a danger to everybody. Why road safety audit a construction site? Well, there's many reasons. And, you know, roadwork sites typically involved a change in speed environment, additional conflicts and confined road space, which can increase the potential for crashes. So it's the new environment is being created because of the roadworks. We're creatures of habit, and, you know, when something changes, we sometimes don't react or act to those changes unless those changes are well managed. And this is by chucking out a sign saying, hey, just slow down to 40k an hour. It's not enough. We need to give that guidance. We need to provide the instructions for that motorist or the pedestrian or the cyclist to be able to work through that site, get through that site. So it's so important that, you know, we that is signed the way and manage the way to get that message across. Traffic arrangements during roadworks can change several times, and really they may not resemble the permanent arrangements that were there. And, you know, audits, even at the design stage of a traffic, you know, doing an audit on the traffic management or the traffic guidance schemes. And there's a question that comes straight to mind. What is the difference between a traffic management plan and a traffic guidance scheme? And if this is a meeting, I'm happy for people to yell them out as well.
Pop there. Look, Andy's popped his hand up, so he's ready to
Yeah, go for it, Andy.
Still on mute though, there, mate. Unmute him.
Sorry, I was muted again. TGS or the TCP is probably the micro look at the intersection, associated merge lengths, and whatever else is associated with the TCP, whereas the TMP is more a macro look at it's outside your intersection, looking in at a broader view of what's the impact on the overall network, whereas the TGS is more specific at an intersection.
Yeah,
Something like that.
Yes, I'd accept that, Andy, for sure. But I think there's a bit more detail in the sense that what a traffic guidance scheme and what a traffic management plan and their role in managing the site. The traffic management plan, it's the overarching document. It's, what are the emergency contact numbers? What industries are going to, or businesses are going to be impacted by our work? What happens if an emergency vehicle comes through our site? How are we going to manage that? It's all about managing the site. What hours are we going to be operating, or are workers going to be on site? What hours do we have to supply aftercare? What's the expected times we'll be on site? Whereas the TGS, or the traffic guidance scheme, it'll be the set of signs and devices that will be used for a particular stage of the roadworks. And also, you could have, I don't know, it could be 10, 15 different TGSs depending on the stage of the work, the time that the work is being undertaken, whether it's outside of hours or during working hours. So it's the detail of the layout, the distances the signs should be apart based upon the approach speeds or the speed you're going to be managing the work at. So that's that level of detail, but the traffic management plan is their overarching document where the TGSs sit within that. And our acronyms may be a little bit different for what I use in Victoria to what New South Wales use, but it's basically the same. And I think that's one of the great things or positives about the new Austroads guides. It's got, the terminology that we're going to use, hopefully will all come into line with what is being recommended in the Austroads guides, for all of Australia and New Zealand, that will end up, those acronyms will all mean the same thing. It might take some time to get to that space. And certainly, New Zealand, their signs are probably more UK based rather than what we use in Australia, but we're trying to get that commonality through that documentation. But thank you. The other, we also, the construction contractors may always appreciate the finer points of traffic management at roadworks. The operation of the safety devices and the like, they often, as I mentioned earlier, they often leave that to the traffic management companies. So it's really important as that road safety auditor that, we are looking at that big picture, that we are ensuring that all those safety concerns are being managed. Ask for the risk assessment. Have they done a risk assessment? What are the mitigating factors that they've taken into account to manage those risks? Ask for that type of documentation. It will really push home the safety message that, this isn't just a matter of putting up a roadwork ahead, a 40km/h sign and a few cones and bollards to make everybody safe, because cones and bollards don't prevent entry into the work site. So there's other devices, concerns that should be managed to ensure we are creating that safe environment for everyone. Again, check the standard arrangement that are applied for consistency. Are they actually using the speed management, or if you're using a regulatory speed, are they being set out in accordance with the standards and the guides? to assess whether standard arrangements are adequate for particular conditions. You know, a lot of times there are examples of what is good practice for traffic guidance schemes, but they're not going to fit every situation. And this is the where we want the designers to have visited the site. You know, Google Maps is pretty good, but sometimes, you know, the age of some of the maps that you can get access to isn't what is currently there. I know, you know, in Victoria, we've put up thousands might be a little bit exaggerated. We've put up hundreds and hundreds of kilometres of barrier, wire rope barrier and W-beam barrier, and that may not be represented on Google Maps. So, you know, as a designer, we should go to site. We should be looking at what are the current conditions we need to sign for, so that we can provide that safe working environment. And that's where standards arrangements may not suit the conditions that we're going to be working in. You know, we've got to avoid those conflicting messages from permanent and temporary devices. You know, there was, and this is going back a lot of years now, but there was a stop sign removed because of roadworks. They're upgrading an intersection. The stop sign was removed. It should have reverted back to, you know, give way to the right type setup without, but you know, that removal of that sign caused an accident. And you know, the totally sad part about that someone was killed in that accident. And so therefore it's so important that, you know, that the permanent signing, if it's changed in any way, shape or form, that the temporary devices will manage that situation to ensure that there's not a conflict, or that the permanent signing is replaced at a location that still can be used to manage the traffic. So, you know, it's just, we can often put up signs, but then all of a sudden there's a conflict between those temporary and permanent signs. That's got to be managed. Again, as auditors, that's something we should be looking at in a lot of detail. And look, signs are used for the correct purposes. You know, it's a very minor thing, but there's an arrow that's used in for detours. There's arrows and T-bars that are used for lane status. Yes, and you know, using the correct arrow in those multi-message signs, as I said, it's a minor detail, but there's a purpose for each sign and what it should be. They are different signs. The arrows are a different shape, so therefore we should be using the signs. If you're doing a lane status signing, that you're using the correct arrows and the correct T-bars. And also providing safety for the personnel as well as the travelling public. You know, we've got to make sure that we're covering off. I've got a photo in a minute that we far too often forget about pedestrians and you know, all the different types of pedestrians and the mobility devices that are used for our pedestrians. And yeah, as I said, a lot of times we forget about those. And crossing points, the last bit on the slide here is to make sure that the crossing points are managed correctly. And you know, where the construction traffic might be a haul road out of a site, that it's being managed accordingly as well. This is the one I was talking about. It's in my hometown. I just went for a walk last night and came across this site. As you can see, that the road on the left is, well, it's a driveway to a couple of houses, but it's also used as the footpath, and it connects down to a river. You know, there's a bit of a landing there. It's a, you know, a bit of an area that is accessible for the public, and it's a nice spot. But there's a development going on, and they've just completely shut off that access, and they've put up these signs. I'm not too sure where everybody can go, the pedestrians can go apart from back onto the road at an unsuitable point. You know, it's just really not acceptable that we are providing that, because what group of our pedestrians is that irrelevant to?
So people can pop in their ideas there on who's not going to get any benefit out of that. There's a question in there Nicole's popped in, which is a really good one, which a lot of jurisdictions don't have to deal with, but the pavement markings of the numerals of the speed zone in New South Wales conflicting with the speed sign. The sign obviously takes the legal precedence, but that could be a possible confusion and something we might look at as auditors.
Like Canon versus a sign on a pole.
Sorry, say again.
On the road versus the
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so I saw an answer come up. Yeah, where is the alternate footpath? Where is the alternate? But I suppose the answer to the question is, visually impaired aren't going to. They're going to get up there and they're going to run across a gate that prevents them from getting from A to B from their normal walking track. So it's been forgotten. But then again, you've got people with prams, children on bikes. That again, the management of those pedestrians that have now get to a point where they can't go anywhere, and there's no direction for them to how to get down to the river or to the walking path that's provided at the end of that. So yeah, it just becomes an easy out. Oh well, we were closing this bit of road. Pedestrians use other footpaths. There are a couple of signs that we've got available. That'll do. Well, it's just not acceptable to do that. And it's a bit like this one as well. Sorry, Ken, did we get the speed bit? I sort of moved on pretty quick. You happy with that discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just to sum up is that it's something that we can look at as auditors as we see if they're going to do that could be an issue, and it may be one way or another that they move the location of the temporary, so they cover up the existing regulatory signs and then start the speed zone just after, or these sorts of things. But yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah,
and speed management has always been, the freeways with the speeds. It eludes me. What's that called? Where they've got the electronic signs, electronic speed.
Sorry, the freeway ones, the lane use management system, the LUMS.
LUMS, and the speed management as well, where they change.
Oh, the variable, variable speed.
Yep. There's been instances where there's been, people have been fined or been found that they were speeding through that site, but with the documentation of saying, well, when were the speeds changed? What was the reason for the changes? But also turning them off and then putting up temporary, slower speeds as well. It's a process that needs a lot of management to ensure that the speed is being managed according to what the site demands, and the planning for that requires a lot. And if speeds are painted on the road, then yes, that's also got to be managed. But I would have thought that the black writing, the red annulus on the white background was the bit that people should be following.
Yeah, it is. Andy, you got your hand up. Is that still up or new? Yep.
Oh, mate, I was just going to give you guys Victorians a plug, mate. I saw the variable speed limit signs in Melbourne on trailer mounted at work sites, and I introduced it pretty much on the Pacific Highway up north rather than changing these hinge signs for our workers. So a plus for you guys, mate. It started something. I saw it in Melbourne and introduced it up north.
Good. There you go. It's a win for everyone.
Yeah, from the Ring Road interchange right through to the Westgate Bridge, they've got those on trailers, which work very effectively, Ken. They've got them all linked, and they can change the speed to those to suit the conditions of, again, to traffic management as well as worker protection. So no, it's a great tool for sure.
Yeah.
Again, and and this is, I'll keep pushing on, Ken, but pedestrian management. I probably have more slides on bad practice with pedestrians than anything else at the moment. But it really is a concern that if someone was on a scooter or have their mobility is not really that good, that we're sending them out onto a nature strip that it's actually, the photo doesn't really show it, but it's a steep drop off. The option crossing to the other side may not be an option. That people may need the traffic signals to do that safely. It's just the practice here is not acceptable, and there's probably reasonable solutions. Is that you backfill that with a crushed rock if you know the concrete's not going to make it that day, and then you just take that crushed rock out of the start of the working day, get the concrete in, have a traffic controller there until the concrete goes off. We can put additives into for the concrete to set quick, and therefore have a person to control the pedestrian traffic, get the job done, everybody's safe. It's the solutions far outweigh what the consequences could be if someone came to grief because of these practices. No, they're not. Although they've got a star pick, it's acceptable practice there, Ken, in one of the questions. I just see them pop up every now and then.
Yeah, sorry, I missed that. Yeah.
They are not a class as a frangible item. So in traffic management for vehicles, no, and they've got to be beyond the clear zone. In this case, look, that road's a 60 kilometre an hour. Is that distance far enough to say it's beyond that clearway? Not sure if that would be acceptable. Certainly the little caps on them, if you're using them to hold up bunting, if it's outside that traffic area, dangerous device everywhere. Sorry, I'm reading these the comments as they come up.
Oh, good. Yeah. Yep.
But they can have a place in putting up these bunting and alike. But make sure that any sharp pieces of them are not going to cause a hazard for people walking past, or
We're moving towards more plastic. I've seen these plastic like type star pickets, but these still things are a hazard.
Yeah, they're not mentioned in any of the documentation anymore. As I said, they're not classed as a frangible item, so therefore they shouldn't be used. But as long as they're outside the traffic lanes that are being managed, it is acceptable. But as you said, but I've also seen plastic ones that unfortunately probably been smacked too hard with the sledgehammer. They chip and peel, and they become with sharp edges as well, or sharp points. So it's making sure that we're not producing a hazard or a risk to those who are near them. So that's the choice of not using them is probably the best. But whatever the alternative is, make sure that it also is not providing a risk to people walking past them. Compliance signing, generally the roadwork signing is black writing on a yellow background, and I presume this manufacturer or the council thought this was the best way for this sign to look. We look at our guidance or our standards, that should be red writing on a white background. So it's not a compliance sign, but the portable traffic signal, it's a regulatory item. So therefore you should have the correct regulatory signing with it. Andy, is that a hand up again?
Yeah, sorry, mate. Sorry I'm asking this question, but it comes up all the time. We talk about clear zone, then we whack these things in within the clear zone, not frangible, doesn't move. Same with our VMS trailers. We whack them in medians and close to the traffic. Has there been any innovation on the structures, the VMS trailers? Any improvements so that they are more frangible?
Not that I'm aware of, apart from when they're used on protecting a work vehicle as such. They might have a workman symbolic or a speed value that's following some sort of patrol vehicle or a grass cutting vehicle, and they will have attenuators on them. If I looked at this one's too close to the edge of the road. The other thing would be that for portable traffic signals, you've got to have the speed down to 40 kilometres an hour. So therefore, that is reducing the clear zone for that particular item. That's probably the only point of management that I could put forward at this on that particular photograph. But good question.
All right, another 7 or 8 minutes, Tony.
Thanks, Ken. Very quick question. Apart from shape, and apologise for my trying to get a right colour, what's the difference between those two stop signs?
From a regulatory sense?
Yeah, let's go from a legal, from a road rules point of view.
Okay.
Yeah, I've quick. One is a lollipop. One's for a traffic controller. Yes, yes. One is a permanent. The other temporary. Yes, but not quite to the road rule or legal side of it. What do you do when you come up to the 8-sided stop sign as a driver? And Justin put up stop. Yes,
Yep.
Agree. Then what, Justin?
Yep.
No, the 3 seconds doesn't matter. That was a past life of mine. I was a licensed tester, and the 3 seconds was a good one for learners to make sure they have stopped. Yes, you must stop. But once you stop, no, both regulatory. I just saw another one. They're both regulatory. Is once you've stopped and you as a driver look to make sure it's all clear, you then can proceed. The one on the right, the round one, as a driver, if that's displayed in front of you, you must remain stopped until either the traffic controller gives you the direction to move on, or it's no longer displayed in your direction. So the one on the left, the driver makes the decision. The one on the right, the actual traffic controller makes the decision.
Yeah, and I think Nicole was in there with that philosophy, but lots of good comments there. So
Yeah,
good. Let's get going.
Seconds. As I said, it was as learner drivers, we got to, well, I remember when I was being taught that was a good practice to make sure you do stop, but under the rules, you've just got to make sure the vehicle is stopped, then you can proceed when it's clear. Like it. And this is a practice we don't want to see. And recently I saw a training organisation offering traffic controller training, and that's the type of photo they had. They had one with the octagon-shaped sign, and I actually sent them an email and said, "Why are you doing this?" And they said, "Oh, it was the only photo we could find that we didn't have ownership for." So anyway, but this is what we want to see. You know, traffic controllers, their clothing is the fluorescent, the stop sign in good condition, and it's important. And as auditors, this is a great one to really look at. If you come to a site with traffic controllers, do they have an escape path? That is just so vital for a traffic controller to make sure that they've got a place to get out of the way if an errant vehicle comes at them. When to audit. Now, this is an important slide, is that we can review the plans, the guidance schemes. We can early at the beginning of a construction if there's any major changes, but in each of those times, we should have a day and night inspection. You should visit the site through the daytime, also visit the site at night time. You know, signs get dirty. They may look okay at the daytime, but at night time, you know, they may not be visible under headlight. So yeah, really important that all through those different types of timings for doing road safety audit at construction sites, that you do a day and night inspection. Common issues, and we've probably talked about most of these. You know, is there adequacy in the advance warning? The speed limits, is it appropriate for the works that are being undertaken and to protect the workers? The appropriateness of the layout. Are there any conflicts between the permanent and temporary features? Aspects of the layout or devices that could be misread by the drivers. You know, the mud and dust on signs and devices, is that obscuring any of the guidance that needs to be for the travelling public? The appropriateness of barriers. Good question to ask also, have they been installed to the manufacturer's specification? So important. I've argued pretty hard that we've got to make sure that we're providing safety for pedestrians, the less agile, the visually impaired, pushing prams and those types of things through loose material is just so difficult. So we've got to provide an area or the conditions that are easy to operate that. Cyclists, let's not forget the cyclists as well, and make sure we're managing the conflict points if there is any for the traffic and the general public, that they are managed accordingly, because you don't want public walking out onto live traffic that's not managed. That's probably it for me, Ken. If there's any burning questions coming up, or if anybody wants to ask.
Yeah, it's been a good discussion. And I mean, I think that it's nicely contextualizing that the road safety audit process is adaptable to these different environments. So it works in road sites and roadworks, road construction sites, and the like. And we need to be implementing that process. I always say that in my many years as being a road safety auditor and also being asked quite a bit to do expert witness for cases, the one that comes up is almost, it'd be 5 to 1 worksite traffic management things that have happened, incidents, compared to anything else. So it's just a bit more litigious and people looking for those issues. And I suppose that's because there's work cover implications, and then there's contractors involved, and so it gets a bit that way. I don't take those on myself because it's not my area of expertise, but it's always interesting the amount of churn that happens in that area.
And it's a really good point you finish off with there, Ken, that and I'll just build on something that's just come to mind, that too often that I think I mentioned earlier, chucking out a workman symbolic and a 40k an hour and a traffic symbolic sign and a few witches hats or bollards, and wearing the high vis jackets, it doesn't give you any protection. They give you no protection whatsoever. Yes, they will give you advance warning. Yes, they will give instructions for the drivers, but unless it's managed correctly, with everything that is in place to get advance warning, to guide the traffic, to tell them when it's all finished. It's so important that we get all those stages managed, that the outcome is that we are ensuring that we have the safety for all the travelling public as well as our workers. So it's so important that we're not just relying on those couple of signs and a traffic jacket thinking that we are now protected.
I think that's a good point to jump onto our last little thing there, Tony. And I thank you for your time and for sharing that. And of course, if anybody does want to follow up with Tony, get in contact, you can do that through myself or straight to Tony there. And as I mentioned, there's a longer presentation from Tony in Moodle that you can watch the video of. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Ken. Thanks, everyone. Happy auditing, and let's keep everybody safe out there. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. And right at the end there, Tony was about to sort of jump into some prompt list stuff, which I'll just briefly cover, because it's more general and we don't want to sort of double up there. But in the Austroads Guide to Road Safety Part 6, at the end of it, there are these things called prompt lists, and they have a series of general questions to help auditors get their head around the context of the project and what they're looking at and the like. None of this is handed in with the audit. It's all just to help your thinking, right? But these things will be called front-loading questions. You know, why is the project happening? And, you know, what are the speeds that you expect and the like? And then there are these prompt lists, local alignment, general aspects, intersection, walking and cycling, traffic signs, line marking and lighting. And so you can go to any of those, and within each of those, there's a column that is for the different stages of audit. So those questions then come up, and I just took a little snip there, but there's lots and lots of questions, and you just go through and read them, and they prompt thinking. So questions come in there from Blair is, you know, what is front loading? I suppose it's just the term that was made up for, like, at the front of your thinking, you ask these questions. You load up yourself up on the information around, you know, what's the reason for the project, are there specific risks that are being addressed, and those sort of things. So that's all I mean by that term. But really, people are into this because it's got details in the questions, and you go through and you just you use them to spark that thinking. Have I thought about, okay, have you thought about sight lines at the intersection? Oh yeah, okay. Have you thought about drainage? And so you'll go through, you'll get that. You don't hand this in. So they are thought starters only. They won't cover everything, but they do help you think of a few things. You need to stand back and look broadly at the scheme and the project. A lot of things are going to be not applicable because they're asking all sorts of questions for all sorts of road environments, and you may not have that road environment in your audit, but they're there just so hopefully nothing's missed, and you don't hand them in, as I keep mentioning. So that's all I wanted to say about prompt lists. So when you get to do your audit in a couple of modules time, we'll point you again at these because they might help you with a bit of that thinking. Well, what I want to do in the last couple of minutes here is to point you again at this primary and supporting categorization of treatments. Somebody was interested in the raised safety platform. It would be great to see New South Wales get one of those up and running. The primary and supporting treatment stuff, I just want to cover this off. So those who have done the Safe System Assessment course, you're quite well versed on this. I ummed and ahed about taking this out for this course with just New South Wales participants because you're not at this stage providing recommendations, but I did decide to leave it in for two reasons. One being that you should know, how to do an audit and present an audit for all the jurisdictions in Australia after you finish this course. So I feel that that's important. And also the second one is, that I would have replaced it with a longer assignment, and I don't want to actually give you more stuff on your plate when it was just this sort of specific that we want clarified. So primary treatments are initiatives that we implement that virtually eliminate the potential for fatal or serious injury crashes occurring associated with a specific crash type. The supporting treatments are still good road safety things to do, but they're not going to virtually eliminate the potential. Of course, in the Safe System Assessment Framework document, which is not the subject of this course, but it does list a whole lot of treatments and categorizes them. But I'm going to give a quick example, and it's based off something Jamie presented there. So if we've got car parking there and you've got a section here, and we are concerned about a vehicle shooting, coming along here, maybe it's 65 as an operating speed or something. And our audit finding talks about the sight lines being impeded, and we risk rate that. Now, if you're in a jurisdiction that then makes recommendations, we saw that a number of you made the recommendation, which is, very good, that, okay, well, let's remove this car park. Okay, so we've removed a car park or maybe two car parks, and we've got the stopping or the safe intersection sight distance has been achieved. That is a supporting treatment, right? Now, why is that only a supporting treatment? We've removed that specific, issue that is the subject of this audit finding. The reason it's supporting is because the crash can still happen. That RUM code still happens, right? Still happens at the same operating speed. Nothing's altered the operating speed. We've lessened the chance that this vehicle will come out, but there is absolutely opportunity for them to make a mistake, to bad judgment call, be distracted by something. Could even be that some other, vehicle parks in here illegally or the like. Doesn't change the angle. It's a good point there, and it doesn't change the severity of the act. So in this situation, I was say that it's not. I'm not saying at all that is like removing that parking as a bad road safety treatment. It's a good road safety treatment. It's just not going to, completely eliminate. Where we go to for things that would be primary in this situation would be to do things like a roundabout, because if there's a roundabout there, it is going to be almost virtually eliminate side impact, passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle death and serious injury, isn't it? Okay, yeah, we might have to think about pedestrians and cyclists and that, but that passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle one, we have virtually eliminated. Great other point in there of other primary treatments, which could be to close this intersection off. Okay, we've eliminated, we've eliminated that side impact at that location. Yeah, obviously there might be migration issues, but signals are supporting. So well done. We're getting the hang of this. This group's got their head around it. So signals are going to be supporting. Why is that? Still speed, still same angle. And again, we're just acknowledging that the red light running will occur. There'll be a lot less crashes, that's for sure, but that could still occur. Right turn ban supporting, yes. Well, it depends potentially on how you do it. If you physically put a median in there, so they can't just do their illegal turns, maybe, and then you'd have to start to think about angles of crashes here. So that gets a bit more complicated. And raised platform primary, yes, it is. Again, you want to sort of make sure that it gets the actual speed reduction. So just what I sometimes call a pretend platform, which is really pretty much flat, and then they've done some piano key markings. Probably not, but the theory is that a platform would be primary. So you can see the focus is not on that specific issue. It focuses on the crash and the mechanics of the crash and the energy in that crash. Okay, and so that's what I want you to sort of get your head around. So the crash can still occur on the raised platform. It'll be the same. The theory is it'll be the same angle, correct? But the theory is the speed should be reduced if designed properly, that the vehicles will be slowing down to navigate over the calming. and the crash can still happen. It's virtually eliminating death and serious injury, not virtually eliminating that crash. You could do that by virtually eliminating the crash, closing the intersection, or through this other mechanism. So the reason I spent a bit of time on that is that's the focus of your quiz. 10 questions around primary and supporting, and that's all we're going to ask you to do at the end of this one. Get your assignments in if you haven't done that already, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Bye.